5 o'clock in the morning, February 21st, 1930. The Arizona State Prison in Florence sits cold and quiet under a fading winter sky. Down a narrow corridor, the sound of boots on concrete echoes, measured, deliberate. Keys rattle against metal. A cell door creaks open. Inside, a 52-year-old woman sits waiting. Her name is Eva Dugan. She doesn't flinch, doesn't cry. When the prison officials tell her it's time, she looks up calmly and says just 2 words, "I'm ready." In a few moments, Eva will walk 13 steps up to the gallows, the first woman in Arizona's history to face execution by the state. But something will go terribly wrong. Something the witnesses will never forget. Just hours earlier, guards discovered a deadly secret hidden beneath her mattress, a 2-ounce bottle of poison, 3 razor blades tucked into her dress. Eva had been planning something, one last act of control before the state could take her life. Yet, here she stands now, calm as a Sunday morning. No tears, no begging. When the guards grip her arms a little too tight on the walk to the death chamber, she tells them, "Don't hold my arms so tight. The people will think I'm afraid." But what drives someone to face their own death with a smile? What goes through a person's mind in those final 24 hours when every breath is numbered, every minute ticking down to nothing? Before we walk through Eva's last day on Earth, I want you to think about something. If you knew you had only 24 hours left, how would you spend them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Eva Dugan's story didn't begin in a prison cell. She was born in Missouri in 1878, the daughter of W.M. McDaniel. As a young woman, Eva trekked north during the Klondike Gold Rush, landing in Alaska, where she worked as a cabaret singer. And when the money ran thin, she found other ways to get by. Life was rarely gentle with Eva. She married 5 times over the years, but each of her husbands vanished mysteriously. No one could ever quite say what happened to them, and Eva wasn't the kind of woman to offer up answers. When Eva made her way south, she landed in Pima County, Arizona, a place known more for its dust and ranches than second chances. By January of 1927, she was in her early 50s, working as a housekeeper for Andrew J. Mathis. Mathis was wealthy, reclusive, and hard to please. He ran a chicken ranch and had little patience for anyone who failed to meet his exacting standards. Mathis and Eva butted heads for nearly 2 months. He was demanding and abrasive, rumored to be miserly with money and miserly with compassion. Neighbors said you could feel the tension in the air whenever they were together. Tension between Eva and Mathis often escalated behind closed doors. He accused her of poisoning his breakfast, while she insisted he had fallen ill from eating rabbit that shouldn't have been served. The accusations and shouting matches made their working relationship unstable. Every conversation seemed to spark another conflict. Mathis finally told Eva to leave his ranch for good, handing her walking papers in an unmistakably harsh way. That same morning, Mathis vanished. Some of his possessions disappeared as well, his Dodge Coupe, a cash box, and more. It didn't take long for Eva to offer up stories to explain Mathis's whereabouts, but her explanations only deepened suspicions in the community. Few believed he'd simply left everything to her. Looking back, the relationship between Eva and Mathis offers a warning we shouldn't ignore. When desperation collides with contempt, when an employer holds all the power and wields it cruelly, something dangerous can take root. Eva needed that job. Mathis knew it. He also knew she had nowhere else to go. That imbalance, one person cornered, the other callous, creates conditions where resentment festers into rage. It doesn't excuse what happened next, but it shows us how toxic dynamics between people in unequal positions can escalate beyond anyone's control. Sometimes the smallest acts of cruelty plant seeds that grow into tragedy. Mid-January 1927. Andrew Mathis stopped showing up in town. His mail piled up. His chickens went unfed. Neighbors noticed his Dodge coupe was missing, and so was Eva. Days later, Eva resurfaced. Alone. She began trying to sell off Mathis's livestock, telling anyone who'd listen that he'd left for California and signed everything over to her before he went. She had paperwork, she claimed, proof that Mathis wanted her to have it all, but the story didn't sit right. Mathis was famously stingy, the kind of man who'd haggle over a nickel. Why would he suddenly give away his entire ranch to a housekeeper he'd just fired? The more Eva talked, the more questions she created. Some days she said Mathis had gone to California. Other times, she hinted he might never come back at all. Neighbors had known Mathis for years. He was cranky, yes. Difficult, definitely. But he was also rooted to that ranch. It was his money, his pride, his whole identity. Walking away without a word just didn't fit. Eventually, someone went to the sheriff. Mathis was officially listed as missing, and the quiet gossip around Pima County turned into active suspicion. Eva, meanwhile, drifted out of Arizona and tried to start over somewhere else, leaving behind nothing but questions, unpaid debts, and an empty ranch that felt more like an unanswered riddle with every passing week. For nearly 11 months, the desert held its secret. Then, in December 1927, a machinist from Oklahoma named J.F. Nash stopped at the old Mathis place while traveling through Arizona. He set up camp on the abandoned property, driving tent stakes into the hard ground. On one of those blows, his stake struck something that didn't feel like rock. Curious, he cleared the dirt away. What he uncovered was a shallow grave. Inside were the remains of a man, badly decomposed, buried on the very land he once owned. Authorities later identified the body as Andrew J. Mathis. The missing rancher hadn't run off to California. He hadn't signed over his property and disappeared into a new life. He had been lying just beneath the soil the entire time. Once Mathis's body was found, every strange detail from the months before took on a new meaning. The missing money, the vanished car, the livestock sales, the conflicting stories. One name kept surfacing in every conversation: Eva Dugan. By then, she was long gone from Arizona, but not out of reach. Investigators learned she had traveled to White Plains, New York, where she was trying to rebuild her life under her own name. A postcard from her father in California, intercepted and flagged, helped authorities track her down. She was arrested in New York and brought back across the country to face questions she had managed to dodge for almost a year. This time, there would be no easy stories, no quick explanations, only a murder charge waiting in Arizona. Eva's choices in those first days after Mathis disappeared are a lesson in how people often expose themselves, not through one big mistake, but through a series of smaller ones. Selling his animals, driving his car, offering clumsy explanations to people who knew his habits better than she did. Each decision may have felt like survival in the moment, a way to grab some security and move on. But when someone vanishes and the person closest to their assets starts cashing in, suspicion is inevitable. In real life, this is one of the biggest red flags, when a person stands to benefit from someone's absence and moves too quickly to claim what's left behind. It rarely goes unnoticed. When Eva was brought back to Arizona, the case against her was more suspicion than solid proof. Still, in February 1928, she was led into a courtroom to stand trial for the murder of Andrew Mathis. The date was February 21st, exactly 2 years to the day before the one set for her execution later on. Prosecutors didn't have fingerprints. They didn't have an eyewitness who saw the killing. What they did have was a dead rancher in a shallow grave, missing property, a housekeeper who had vanished, and a trail of behavior that looked a lot like guilt to a jury already on edge. Sometimes that is all it takes. The state painted a simple, brutal picture. They argued that Ava had struck Mathis with an axe, killed him, and buried him on his own land before taking his car, his money, and trying to sell off his animals. To the prosecution, this was about greed. A woman with a past full of vanished husbands backed into a corner, finally taking what she felt she was owed. They reminded the jury of her changing stories, her attempt to claim the ranch as her own, and the fact that she left town without looking back. Piece by piece, they turned circumstance into certainty. In a courtroom like that, small, close, and full of judgment, nuance rarely stands a chance. Eva didn't stay silent. She took the stand and offered a very different version of what happened on that ranch. According to her, a teenage boy named Jack had come by looking for work. Mathis hired him, but it didn't last. One day, Mathis ordered Jack to milk a cow. When Jack refused, Mathis beat him. Jack fought back, landing a punch that knocked the older man down. Eva claimed Mathis hit his head and never got up. She said they tried to revive him, even taking out his false teeth to perform mouth-to-mouth. Then, according to her, Jack loaded the body into Mathis's car and drove away to dispose of it alone, leaving her behind to deal with the fallout. It was a strange story, but strange doesn't always mean untrue. The jury didn't buy it. To them, Jack sounded like a convenient ghost, a name with no face, no record, no trace. After weighing the circumstantial case and her testimony, they returned a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. That verdict carried only two options in Arizona at the time: life in prison or death by hanging. When the sentence of death was read, Ava didn't crumble. Instead, she met the jurors with the same sharp tongue she'd shown everyone else in her life. She told them she'd die in good health with her boots on, something most of them couldn't say for themselves. It was a final jab, a way of keeping a shred of control in a room where every decision had gone against her. By early 1930, Eva had been sitting under a sentence of death for nearly 2 years. Appeals had run their course. The noose was no longer just an idea. It had a date, February 21st. With time slipping away, her lawyers turned to the only path left: mercy. They petitioned the Arizona Board of Pardons and Paroles, asking that her sentence be reduced from death to life in prison, arguing that her mental state and history should spare her from the gallows. A clemency hearing was scheduled. For a brief moment, there was a crack in the door, one final chance to step away from the edge. If the board agreed, Eva would still die behind stone walls, but not with a rope around her neck. The board listened, questioned, and weighed what was put in front of them. They knew the case had been built on circumstantial evidence. They also knew the public was watching closely, especially after details of Mathis's death and Eva's past had circulated through newspapers and rumors. In the end, the vote was not in her favor. 2 members voted against clemency, 1 in support. By a margin of a single voice, her fate was sealed. Her team tried again, pushing for a reprieve based on questions about her sanity. A jury was convened to decide whether she understood what was happening to her. They found her competent, fully aware of her situation and the punishment that waited. The state of Arizona had made up its mind. Eva would hang. From that point on, every tick of the clock in her cell meant something different. Before the hearing, there had been a sliver of maybe. After the denial, there was only when. People who visited her on death row described her as composed, even cheerful at times, still quick with a joke or a sharp comment, but beneath that there had to be an awareness that the countdown had truly begun. This is the quiet cruelty of a system like this. It doesn't just take a life. It stretches out the waiting. It offers a window of hope, then slams it shut. For anyone watching from the outside, Ava's case is a reminder that once the machinery of punishment starts moving, mercy becomes rare. By the time you reach the clemency stage, you're usually arguing with a decision that's already been emotionally accepted by those in power. Eva's last full day on Earth didn't start with screaming or prayers. It started with routine. Guards came and went. Meals were slid through bars. The same footsteps, the same sounds, just like every other day on death row. But this time, everyone knew the date circled on the calendar was tomorrow. As evening settled over the prison on February 20th, Ava wasn't alone. She spent those hours with the prison chaplain and a small circle of friends who had come to see her through to the end. They talked. They sat in silence. They passed the time in that strange space where people try to be normal while standing at the edge of something that is anything but normal. Outside her cell, the death watch paced, listening for any sign that she might break. If you had walked past her cell that night without knowing what was scheduled for the morning, you might have thought it was any other late hour on a quiet block. Eva sat at a card table, playing whist with two women friends and another female prisoner. There was laughter. There were small jokes. Now and then, someone would glance at the clock, but the game went on. They played until after midnight. The way witnesses later described it, Eva carried herself like someone who refused to let the moment own her. She had been many things in her life: singer, wife, housekeeper, defendant. On that last night, she seemed determined to be something else. Not a victim, not a spectacle, just a woman finishing a hand of cards while the system waited for her to run out of time. Around 1 a.m., the mood around her shifted, not because of anything Eva did in front of witnesses, but because of a message that reached the warden. Lorenzo Wright, the man in charge of carrying out her execution, was told that Eva had managed to get her hands on poison. The implication was clear. She might be planning to take her own life before the state could do it for her. Wright didn't hesitate. He had her moved out of her regular cell and into the condemned chamber earlier than planned, then ordered a full search of the place she'd just left. What they found confirmed the tip: a small bottle of deadly poison hidden beneath her mattress, 3 razor blades sewn into a dress, and a bottle of raw ammonia. Those discoveries said something important about her mindset. For all her calm, she had been thinking about a different ending, one where she chose the moment and the method, even if the destination was the same. After the search, there was no more illusion of privacy or control. Eva was now in the space where she would spend her last hours and take her last steps. The cards were gone. The casual conversation was over. What remained was a narrow stretch of time between 1 a.m. and sunrise, broken up by quiet visits, prayers, and the steady presence of guards who could not change what was coming even if they wanted to. Accounts describe her as composed even then. No public displays of panic, no visible collapse, but that doesn't mean she wasn't afraid. Fear doesn't always show up as shaking hands or tears. Sometimes it shows up in preparation, a hidden bottle, a backup plan, a mind that can't quite accept handing over every last decision to the state. By the time the sky outside began to lighten, any alternative she'd considered had been taken away. Around 5 a.m., the final act of the process began. The officials assigned to the execution walked down the corridor toward the condemned chamber, keys and chains announcing their approach. When they reached Ava, there were no more delays left to grant, no more legal steps left to file. This was the moment every date, every hearing, every denial had been pushing toward. When they told her it was time, she didn't scream or argue. She answered with the same words that have followed her story ever since. "I'm ready." Her hands were tied behind her back. She was escorted toward the gallows. Witnesses later said she walked steadily, not fighting, not dragging her feet. Whatever she truly felt inside, on the surface she held on to something that looked a lot like courage. Or maybe stubbornness. Maybe both. When you know there is no way out, sometimes the only thing left to control is how you meet the ending. Eva chose to meet hers standing up. The execution chamber at the Arizona State Prison wasn't grand or dramatic. It was a plain room with a wooden platform, a trap door, and rows of chairs set out for the witnesses who had been approved to attend. On this morning, there were around 30 to 40 people present, including 6 women. An unusual sight for an execution in that era. Eva was led up the 13 steps to the platform. Her boots met each board with a steady, measured sound. She didn't fight the guards or try to pull away. If anything, she seemed almost careful, as if she didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her stumble. To many watching, she looked more like a person walking onto a small stage than someone about to be killed. Once Eva reached the top, the noose was waiting. The rope hung down from the beam, already tied, already tested. She stood where they told her to stand. The black hood was brought forward, ready to cover her face, the last barrier between her and the eyes watching from those rows of chairs. When asked if she wanted to say a final word to the witnesses, she declined. No apology, no confession, no last speech for the newspapers to print. Before the hood went on, Warden Lorenzo Wright stepped close enough to speak to her. He took her hand and said, "God bless you, Eva." She answered him softly, "Goodbye, Daddy Wright." It was an oddly familiar farewell, almost casual. In that exchange, you can feel how long they had both lived with this moment coming, each on opposite sides of the same terrible task. At 5:02 a.m., everything narrowed to a single action. The hood was in place. The noose was snugged around her neck. The witnesses were silent, waiting. Wright gave the signal, and the mechanism was triggered. The trapdoor beneath Eva's feet swung open, and she fell through, the rope snapping tight in an instant. What happened next was not what the officials intended. The drop was too long, or the calculations for her weight and the rope's length were off. Instead of breaking her neck cleanly and leaving her body hanging as planned, the force was so great that it tore through flesh and bone. In that moment, the controlled clinical execution the state had promised turned into a scene that many in the room would never fully be able to put into words again. Within seconds, the room erupted, not in noise, but in reaction. Several witnesses collapsed where they stood or sat. Reports say that at least 5 people fainted, including 2 women and 3 men. Those who remained conscious were left staring at a sight no one had prepared them for. The officials moved quickly to clear the chamber, pushing people out so that what had just taken place would not turn into even more of a spectacle than it already was. Prison Dr. L.A. Love stepped forward and pronounced Eva dead. Her body was taken away under the care of the physician and an undertaker, while the floor was cleaned and the platform reset for the future the state had planned for others. But nothing about that morning felt routine anymore. Whatever else people believed about Eva, guilty, dangerous, defiant, her execution made one thing impossible to ignore. When the state chooses to kill, it cannot always control how that killing looks. News of what happened in that chamber spread quickly. Descriptions differed in tone and detail, but one point was clear. This was not the kind of death the public had been told hanging would provide. In the years that followed, lawmakers in Arizona faced growing discomfort with the method they had used on Eva. By 1934, the state formally abandoned hanging and adopted the gas chamber as its new means of execution, arguing that it would be more controlled, more humane. Eva Dugan remains the only woman ever executed by the state of Arizona. Her story is often remembered for the horror of that final moment, But if you look closer, it also exposes a deeper truth. Once a system decides death is a punishment it is willing to use, it will keep searching for tidier methods. The reality, though, is that there is no neat way to end a human life. There is only the impact that life, and that ending, leaves behind.